Hello, my name's Lee Hopkins. I come from Hemel Hempstead, which is in the UK. About 8 years ago, I started getting very severe headaches. Went to my local doctor, Dr. Richardson, in the Fernville surgery in Hemel Hempstead. He didn't know what was wrong with me. Prescribed tramadol, which I was on for 2 years. The headaches only came in spring and in autumn. Every day, mostly at night, I'd go sleep. 2 hours later, I'd wake up with a really severe headache. Take the tramadol, and then I'd be awake all night, being sick. The tramadol didn't work. The pain was the same, but I'd be in some sort of haze with the drugs, stay awake all night, and then get up in the morning and go to work, which would last for the whole of spring and the whole of autumn. And like I say, that lasted for 2 years. Then my doctor, Dr. Richardson, found the term cluster headache and all the information that came with it. And we went through a process of trying different drugs, somatropam, topiramate. I took a course of steroids, which made me really fat. Nothing was working. A lot of them made me sick, and nothing changed. I was ill every spring and every autumn. Very severe headaches, which lasted for 3 hours up to 9 hours. I was told by neurologists that cluster headaches don't last till 9 hours, so it's not a cluster headache, and maybe it was a migraine. I'd had migraines as a child in my teens, and I knew it wasn't a migraine. It was a lot worse. So eventually we got to the drug verapamil, which is a calcium blocker, and it works for heart problems, but it also works for migraines, and it does work for clusters. So I had about 3 months taking verapamil, and it was like a cure. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm there. After about 3 months, the headaches started coming back, as all drugs do. You get they don't work so well. Then my mum found, for a friend where she works, which is a doctor's surgery, the fact that you can take oxygen. So I went back to my GP. He sorted out the oxygen, and we got to the stage where I was on verapamil constantly. And on the onset of an attack, I would take oxygen and a triptan, which would, I'll get to that later. Anyway, this would reduce the attack to about half an hour, which was, amazing. But I had to be within 5 minutes on the oxygen and taking a triptan, which obviously when you're working, driving, on holiday, whatever, it's quite difficult. But I'd resign myself to the fact that that was my life. Lugging loads of oxygen around, always make sure I got a supply of triptans, always make sure I got verapamil. But the attacks were still seasonal, so it was still spring and autumn. About 4 years ago, things went really bad, and which I now know is chronic. So previously I was episodic, which means quarterly in spring and autumn, and then suddenly I became chronic. And that's when my life really changed. Every day I would have an attack. Every night I would have an attack. Sometimes 3 times a day. The attacks could last up to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. I struggled in life. It was very difficult. Going on holiday was a nightmare because obviously you needed access constantly to the oxygen. Going abroad was very difficult. Being stuck on a plane was very terrifying because they wouldn't let the oxygen on the plane. Very difficult. Anyway, so you start looking on the internet thinking, is there a way around this? I've been to see neurologists and they're all saying, no, that's it, that's your life. You've got to accept it, you've got to get on with it. Work was, I never lost any time at work, but it was very difficult. I would disappear for a couple of hours at a time. I've got my own business, so it was possible, but I would disappear and hide and take the triptans and the oxygen at work and so forth. I missed loads and loads of family events. I would never go to the pub anymore and see my friends because alcohol is a trigger for clusters. But this time the doctor had looked into it, and alcohol was definitely a trigger. Exercise was a trigger. Heat was a trigger. Smells was a trigger. Just a living hell, absolute living hell. So I started investigating myself. Went online, Googled cluster, and loads of different things come up, and then Dr. Shevel's name appeared, and the headache clinic in South Africa. And on this website of his, he's got these testimonials, like this one I'm doing now, of different people that have suffered from cluster headaches. The reason that I knew that it was true, these people were genuine cluster headaches, because they shared their experience like I am now. And only a cluster sufferer would understand how horrific the life is, especially a lady called Deborah Zale from New York, who she'd suffered for 17 years. Absolutely horrendous life story she had, a cluster life story. Eventually she'd come to the headache clinic 2.5 years ago, went for a process with Dr. Shevel, which I believe was over 50 days, and at the end of it she sat and done a testimonial, and she said she was pain-free, which for a cluster sufferer to say is a big statement, and I know that. So I gathered all the information up, printed it off, went to see my doctor, wouldn't even consider looking at it. It's in South Africa, no, I'm not interested. Okay, so I went to see a neurologist. I paid privately to go and see a neurologist, laid all the information out on the table. No, not interested. Oh, okay, so I went away and sat and thought about it, and then it dawned on me. I thought, well, these people that have done this testimonial are genuine cluster sufferers. I understand their story. I understand that Dr. Shevel has helped them. So I decided it was my problem. It was down to me to sort this out, nothing to do with the NHS. So I contacted Dr. Shevel. He then gave me all the information about the procedures to do with cluster headaches, the cost. He can arrange accommodation, the whole setup. So sat down with my family, explained what I was going to do. They were happy. After I showed them Deb Zale's testimonial, they realised that she was identical to me, and at the end of it she was saying she was pain-free and it was genuine. So I flew down, I think it was 58 days ago, I flew down to South Africa, met Dr. Shevel and his team in his clinic, which is a very impressive clinic, very modern, very state-of-the-art, very clean. And I started the process with Dr. Shevel. First of all, an interview with Dr. Shevel. You then spend a day being diagnosed with all the different types of headaches. You meet all these different specialists, a neurologist, Dr. O. You meet Dr. De Bruin, who's the GP, in-house GP, which she sorts out all your drugs while you're here, Dr. Shevel and all the staff, all wonderful people. I then went to the local hospital, had a CT scan on my head to show a map of all the arteries. While I was at home, whenever I had an attack, I would always get a wet t-shirt, roll it into a rope, tie it around my head and pull it as tight as I could during the attack. I would always push my hands into my eyes. Sometimes when it was really bad, I'd push my eye into the table, the corner of the table, and I would push my face into the corner. Why, I didn't know. So Dr. Shevel has explained. He said to me that the arteries on the outside of your scalp are dilating, they're expanding, and they're causing the pain. There's also an artery inside the back of your mouth that needs to be cauterised, which also causes the pain. And it's just a process of finding these arteries, and he will cauterise them. And what I was doing by pulling this t-shirt was actually cutting the blood to these arteries. And the triptans that I was taking is the same thing. They were stopping the dilation of the artery. So Dr. Shevel's procedure is to cauterise these arteries that are causing the trouble, and in effect you're permanently putting a wet t-shirt around them and cutting the blood off. So I thought, right, this sounds fantastic. This is what I want to do. So we went ahead. I've been here 58 days. I've had all the procedures. During that time, I've had unlimited access to all the oxygen that I've needed, and that's 24 hours a day. Dr. Shevel has delivered the oxygen on a Sunday evening to my apartment, which the headache clinic had set up for me. Lovely apartment with a swimming pool and a housemaid and lovely people. But I always had oxygen, which at the start of this process I needed every day, 2 bottles every day. I had unlimited access to triptans through Dr. De Bruin. After every procedure, which some of them was quite small, which is you can see there, they were cutting and cauterising, and then they would stitch me up. I'd need antibiotics, which that was all sorted. I had proper mouthwashes, and I had a 24-hour day constant access to Dr. Shevel through a phone. which only has 2 numbers on, which is the clinic front desk and Dr. Shevel, which is 24 hours a day. Anyway, 58 days. We've got to the point that I no longer use oxygen. I no longer take triptans. The verapamil's gone. In my opinion, I'm 80% pain-free. There's a slight problem still with exercise. I go spinning, which I've continued doing in South Africa, which can be quite extreme for an hour. And at the end of that, I do get a very mild cluster attack, which, with a slight intake of oxygen, is gone. Dr. Shevel believes that this is to do with depleted oxygen levels in my blood, which is the exercise, and as clusters come when you're asleep mostly, it's the same thing. When you go to sleep, your oxygen levels drop, and you normally get an attack 2 hours later, which I don't get anymore. So I'm going home today. I'm very, very happy. I don't know how to say thank you to someone who's changed my life. It's just amazing. I'm over the moon. I shall be keeping a check on the exercise, and Dr. Shevel has proposed that I have a supply of oxygen that I can take after the exercise, which immediately eradicates any pain. And that's it really. Thank you very much.